A big thank you and gratitude to all the panelists sitting here. Please look at their names, look at the designations. It is important because we've really put together a panel that has vast experience, authentic, credible knowledge. This is not the information that you will get while scrolling reels. So this is going to be an important discussion. Let me first start, Dr. Niranjan, with you. In our country, the state of heart health is alarming. It is concerning because, we are in the news business, and every day all of us are getting to hear younger and younger people succumbing to heart diseases. What do you attribute this increasing trend to?
First of all, thank you for having me here again after being here in last year's panel as well. And that's a great question. And of course, now I think it's kind of a SOS for all of us right now. See, there are two main problems that we encounter. First and foremost, we are rapidly becoming the diabetic capital of the world, actually. Yeah, very high incidence of diabetics, and you combine that with stress, combine that with say a family history, and stress at a very young age. Right, competition is increasing. We are the most populated country in the world. So all of them start contributing slowly. It's like slow poison. Every single day, slowly, you start, getting affected. And the problem is these things don't start at 30s or 40s. They actually start very early, maybe in your early teens or in your early young adulthood.
Okay.
And then they manifest at 30, 35, and 40. I have a huge pool of patients who are between the age of 35 and 40. Who have had heart attacks, who are going to have heart attacks, who have very high levels of sugar and high levels of glucose and high blood pressure, and also rising incidence of smoking amongst very early.
Yes.
So yeah, I mean, I think we have all the recipe for disaster in our country, honestly.
Yeah. There's a very interesting point that you made, that you said a population that is going to have heart attacks. I'm going to come back to that because that is going to remain vital if we can preempt, if we can figure out who are more prone to getting heart diseases. I'll come back, but let me get in Dr. Sanchita. Dr. Sanchita, there is increasingly a conversation around toxic workplace, toxic work environment, and there is an impact of stress. Young people like us, we do not follow a timetable to eat, so we are eating whenever we get the time. We're eating fast because we have tons of other things to do. How do you see that affect health, immunity, and our proximity to certain diseases that could have been avoided?
Yeah, stress is a very important lifestyle factor causing a lot of chronic diseases in the world today. And, if we look at the chief underlying causes or the underlying factors in lifestyle diseases, there are few, like one would say inflammation. So that's a very chronic low-grade inflammation that is happening in all chronic lifestyle diseases. And when we are stressed, that inflammation increases.
Okay.
In fact, we have inflammation in the brain also. So stress plays a very important role. Second underlying cause of lifestyle diseases is oxidative stress. And when we are stressed, the oxidative stress in the body increases. To explain oxidative stress, you can take the example of an apple. You cut it into two pieces. You keep it on the table. It starts browning, right? So that is oxidation happening on the apple. Similar kind of oxidation, a browning of our body happens inside, and that can be increased because of stress, right? The third thing, you might have heard about the gut-brain axis. That's becoming a common thing now. People have heard about it, people are understanding it. Our gut and our brain are very, very intricately connected. So when we are stressed out, when we are feeling anxious, depressed, mentally unstable, it starts affecting our gut also. And it leads to inflammation of the gut too. So these are interrelated factors: diet, stress, lack of physical activity, lack of sleep. They all affect us in various ways, leading to chronic lifestyle diseases.
Right. And interestingly, all of this is preventative, which is your area
Absolutely.
of expertise. Let me bring in Dr. Sharvari. Dr. Sharvari, you are an endocrinologist, and you know, a lot of us argue that Indian diets essentially are carbs heavy. I mean, हम सब्जी खाते हैं रोटी खाने के लिए. You know, we eat a little bit of dal, but the chawal is what covers our plate. But is that really a problem? Because when it comes to increasing cases of diabetes and obesity, half the time we're ordering out. So do you see our traditional home-cooked meals a problem?
Well, that's a very valid question, I must say, because there's so much talked about diet, especially diet fads these days,
Yes.
that we're more influenced about what is put up on social media than what actually matters to our body.
Yes.
And unfortunately, these reels and social media information is not tailored. It's not for individuals. It's for the population. And it may not suit everyone. Hence, coming to your question, Indian diets have always been carbohydrate rich. It's not today that we've started to incorporate carbohydrates in our diet.
Yeah.
It has always been there, because that's what we grow in our country. Agriculture has always been the main source of earning,
Yeah.
and wheat and rice have largely been grown over the years. But the problem started when we started processing that food, when we started processing and ultra processing it and taking out all the essential nutrients out of the carbohydrates that we put in our plate every day. And that is when the problem started to occur. Also, not that, our sedentary lifestyle that just got worse and is only getting worse with every passing year now. We see that we're longer seating hours, there's very less mobility. Exercise is probably not so common still in our population. And as people are still not aware about it as much as they need to be. So I don't see carbohydrate as the only problem, or the Indian diet as the only problem in our population, but there are various factors. There's a lot of lack of awareness that needs to be addressed. And I think when we put it out in on a platform like this, it's a good way of telling everyone what is right for them and what is not. A lot of people just stay away from gluten because influencers tell them to do so, but it's not right and it's not needed. And I think that is what needs to be told by an expert.
Yes, absolutely, by an expert. Dr. Ved, let me get you into the conversation. And, you know, the big C. For long, we all thought that cancer is a stroke of bad luck. You know, किसी को भी हो सकता है और जिसको हुआ, you know, बुरी किस्मत है. But research is now telling us more about who could be possibly prone. How do you see nutrition and what we are eating, the lifestyle, how do you see that fit the story?
First of all, I would like to thank you for inviting me here, and it's really a pleasure to be here.
Our pleasure, sir.
Yeah, and to start with, ma'am has already struck the note by telling that how the oxidative stress, how the cardiac factors they work, how the metabolism works. So it is important to understand that our body is very sensitive to what we eat. So whatever we are going to eat, which we call nutrition, so it is just one component of the lifestyle. So lifestyle can have multiple components. It is about your chronobiology, that how, at what time do you sleep, at what time do you wake up, how do you exercise, and nutrition is a very important component. So now you know that with the availability of so many fast foods, ultra processed foods, which contain so many additives, preservatives, and they are not very high in, they are not very nutritionally, they are not very high in quality. So we don't know what these agents are going to cause. Ma'am just mentioned that the gut-brain axis. So let me tell that how the gut and the brain, they are connected. So what you eat, it changes the gut microbiota. So there are healthy bacteria in your gut, and when you eat all this kind of unhealthy food or the not food which is not very nutritious, it can change your entire microbiota. And these change in microbiota can directly impact the chemical transmitters which are processed in the brain, which are secreted in the brain. So this is how the gut-brain axes are connected. And these chemicals, they increase the oxidative stress. They can impair the abilities of your body to repair the damaged cells, which can ultimately lead to the cancers and the other complications.
Right. I owe you an apology because I addressed a question that was addressed to Dr. Ved. But thank you for your insight there. And Dr. Ved, you're the person to speak on cancer.
Sorry,
I apologize. It was my bad.
Nothing is in isolation, actually.
Yes.
An example is that WHO has issued an advisory that 20% of the cancers are going to be linked to overweight. Obesity is the cause for 20% of the cancers. We used to say that tobacco is 40%. Now add obesity to it, 20%. Now, how does obesity happen? There is a imbalance in what you eat, what you burn, and the quality of food you eat. Now, food is one of the very highly researched part of the cancer story. We know that vegetarian, Mediterranean type of diet is more protective. One key example, colorectal cancer wasn't very prevalent in this part of the world, largely because of the vegetarian diet. So there is always an upside and a downside to every diet. Now, the colon cancer incidence is increasing in India because our diets have shifted from being vegetarian to now we are getting non-vegetarian foods, and also processing and ultra processing.
Yes.
The second part of diet is, which is invisible. We eat what is visible, what is there in the diet. Now the next tobacco or next smoking is insecticides and pesticides. Many cancers have been now mapped out, documented to be linked to pesticides. So imagine what a farmer 2,000 kilometers away is doing. That is getting into what the cow is grazing on.
Yeah.
That's getting into the water supply, and you and me in Delhi are drinking the same water. So it's gotten into the food chain. The third is the way we cook our food, and there is an ample amount of data and evidence to say that cooking foods at high temperatures, like cooking kebabs, go to Northeast, they cook their meat on open fire.
Yeah.
The incidence of cancer in Aizawl district is equivalent to the highest incidence of cancer anywhere in the world. That's certain parts of US. They have an incidence of 400 plus per 100,000, when the national incidence is 95 per 100,000. Aizawl has that. So there is a link to that. Stomach cancer, very high in Kashmir, very high in Andhra, because pickling of the foods, very heavily salted foods, and this comes from very elegant data of refrigeration. Japan used to do their pickling of the fish, centuries old practice, because there was no refrigeration. When refrigeration came in the 30s and 40s and 50s, they stopped pickling their fish and they started putting the fish now into the refrigerators. And the incidence of food pipe and stomach cancer dropped. So it's a very complex scenario, and what we eat is leading to a huge amount of upheaval in the body.
Absolutely, and this is so interesting that small things are impacting our lives and our, proximity to disease in such a
And
big
the greens, fruits, vegetables, they are protective. Now, it's actually not appropriate to do a division based on the socioeconomic status, but as a cancer specialist, I'm used to the term poor man's cancers and rich man's cancers. And the poor man cancers are the ones where the intake of vegetables and fruits is poor.
Yeah,
And they are directly linked to the lack of fruits and vegetables in the diet.
yeah.
So
yeah.
the simple things
Yeah, absolutely.
translate into so much of impact.
Absolutely. Let me get Dr. Ashok Kumar Vaid now, into the conversation. Apologies for earlier, but my question actually, the one that I had for you, Dr. Gupta, was the rise of health supplements, and these are now everywhere, these health supplements for everything. How can people determine what is beneficial for them without getting into some sort of marketing traps? Because they can these supplements also adversely affect if they are not the right ones to take?
First of all, it is important to understand that why do we need to take a supplement? So most of the people, they are taking supplements because of some short-term benefits.
Yeah.
Like just Samira told that they don't have a long-term goal.
Yeah.
They want to achieve somebody wants to prevent a hair fall, so they will go for
Yeah.
some supplement. Somebody wants to look more youthful, so they will go for some supplement. Somebody simply they want to build some muscles, so they will go for the protein supplements. So it is important to understand that every time it is always better to get your daily requirements from the natural foods. It is the whole grain, plant-based diets which are the best then the nuts are the other things which you can have. And the supplements, unless and until you don't have any deficiencies or you have some reasons to have some deficiencies, only then the supplements are indicated. Otherwise, there is no role for any kind of supplement for the prevention. They don't prevent anything.
Okay.
So it should be very clear. If you feel that your diet is lacking in something, you are not able to take adequate proteins, you are not able to take adequate micronutrients, only then, or you may be having some diseases, like for example, you may be having a malabsorption syndrome in which you are not able to absorb the foods properly. You may be on some drugs which are interfering with the absorption of certain vitamins. For example, people with diabetes, they are often on metformin. So metformin delays or reduces the absorption of vitamin B12. So giving a supplement of vitamin B12 here makes some sense.
Yeah.
But otherwise, there is no role for any supplement.
Can I make a comment
Sure,
here?
sure.
Supplements, there have been studies that people men who have been on high doses of supplemental vitamin E will have a higher incidence of prostate cancer. So these are not innocent things.
Yes.
These are not innocuous things. And the younger generation who's sitting here and who are using the gyms and who are using the gym-based supplements, there is a very recent study published only about 2 weeks back. What they found that after about 1970, the incidence of colon cancer has risen in the age group of 30 to 50. We were traditionally taught, when I was a medical student, that colon cancer is a cancer of the 60s and 70s and beyond. It's not uncommon today to see somebody at 40, 42. In the supplements being used in the gyms, and this is a scientific study, mind you, there is an agent called as taurine.
Okay.
Taurine goes and upsets the microbiome, what is being talked about. And that leads to a higher incidence of colon cancer.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's a work of the last 50 years which has been published now.
Yeah.
So they are not innocent, they are not innocuous.
Absolutely, because there are so many who just pop pills because they think that is
And
going to help.
Just to add to that, we have recently published a consensus statement from Association of Physicians of India, that is the API. It was published a couple of months back only, and it talks about that where exactly you need some supplements or what is the role of micronutrients. So it is a detailed paper which has been published recently, and we have talked about that supplements are not required unless and until there is a valid indication for that.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Gupta. Let's throw the ball from that end to this now. Dr. Ranjan, coming back to your point where you said that there is a population that is I want you to take that point across and tell us what is it that indicates to you that this population or this person or this patient is susceptible, is prone to heart diseases, and also talk to me about the importance of exercise, and is it something that one size fits all, because we are all wearing our smart watches that is telling us to walk 10,000 steps. Is that enough? A lot of women say hum to ghar ka kaam karti hain, so that is equivalent to exercise. Talk to me about the correlation also.
Let's create let me use a real world scenario, right? I was doing a clinic recently in Noida, and I had a gentleman walk into my clinic, a very busy businessman, okay, and he comes in a rush to the clinic just because I'm sitting there and he wants to get a checkup done. And then I check his blood pressure, it's 160 by 100, okay, normal is 120 by 80. And then I ask him, how's your lifestyle? Do you smoke? Yes, I smoke. And he also chews tobacco. Okay. And then he's easily overweight. And then I asked him about his sugar levels. He said, I recently had diabetes, but I've been detected to have diabetes, but I'm not taking any medications. This is like, he's so casual about it. So this is just one example of how these patients, and this guy, mind you, he has easily about 40% risk of having a sudden heart attack in the next 3 or 4 years, easily. Okay, and this is just one example. Like this, we have numerous people in their 30s who are not watching their weight. They are just in a very fast lifestyle. Everybody wants to make quick money, quick living. We are living in a day and age where people don't have enough patience for everything. Health comes last, absolutely in the end. And then we ask ourselves, like, why is it happening to me? I was so good, I did everything, but at 35, because you're not looking after yourself. We don't prioritize ourselves. We only prioritize everything around us. And I'll give you another example. Another 35-year-old, his friend died suddenly, so he came to my hospital to get it checked. And then I did all his blood tests, and I got a treadmill test done, and there were some ECG changes on the treadmill, and his cholesterol levels were high. I asked him, and he also clearly was slightly overweight. I said, I think, you know, your ECG doesn't look good. It looks like you're going to possibly have a heart attack. Can we get you checked? Can we do an angiogram? He thought I was dragging him, reeling him in to make some money. He clearly left. He said, none of this is all nonsense. I'm not getting anything done. Like, it is alarming. One, there is no awareness. Even if there's awareness, there's denial. And if there's, nobody wants to take the corrective course of action. And unfortunately, because our youth population is so huge right now, and you know, they're all getting fast into that age group where they're going to start seeing diseases. There's so many 38-year-olds, 36-year-olds who are already diabetic because of lifestyle problems, not because of family history, right?
Yeah, but I mean, all of us sitting here, we're not going to go to a doctor, right? Some of us will have to look at some symptoms, some indications. Who are the people who should see a doctor?
I feel if you're leading a sedentary lifestyle, you're eating a lot of extra food, especially from the outside, you are smoking, and you know, and you have family history, then today, right now, you need to go to the hospital, get yourself checked.
All right. So if you have these 4 indicators, please do not hesitate to see your doctor of your choice. But also answer this question for me, Dr. Ranjan, that we all say that we have active lifestyles and, you know, we don't really need to take our time to exercise, or I'm doing the 10,000 steps. Is that enough?
See, 10,000 steps is not a random number that's come up into circulation. It was actually a study conducted by the American Heart Association as well as ACC, American College of Cardiology, and they found out that there's a sweet spot. 10,000 steps equates to about 800 calories per day, and that is what is said to be the sweet spot to call yourself active in a day. And that's why that 10,000 steps came into the picture. And it is directly linked to reducing your risk of heart disease by at least, heart attacks by at least 5 times, reduces. Okay. So that is why you have to be active. Now, for people who say, I work all the time in the house, there is no quantitative measurement of how much you work. It could be one person working throughout the day and maybe even more than 10,000 steps versus somebody doing, you know, some moderate amount of work just twice a day, which is not even, you know, worth burning 200 calories, so to speak. So it's a very quantitative misconception.
Got it. Understood. Dr. Sanchita, want to bring you in, and you know, we've all been saying, and we acknowledge that there is a lot of unverified but readily available information on nutrition and diet, you know, right on our fingertips, on the palm of our hands. Sometimes, instead of benefiting, it adversely affects us. How can people, all of us, find that balance, you know, and you know, gauge what is the correct information? Is everything that is available on the internet to be used? How do you tell your patients to, you know, sort of use good information versus bad information?
Okay, yes, there is a lot of misinformation and myths on the internet, and it's difficult for people, for the layman, to understand what is right and what is wrong. So especially if you have a problem, I think the best thing would be to visit your nutritionist or visit a doctor. If you already have a lifestyle disease and you are on medications, then it's better you visit a doctor who is also interested in nutrition, who is working through nutrition to cure people, because they'll be able to give you the best information. It's very difficult to make out what is right, what is wrong. There's so much confusion. There is so much of, for influencers are doing a lot of work where they talk about things which will give them some quick views and stuff like that. So I think the best and the safest way would be to visit a doctor who is working also on nutrition, who will be able to guide you, or a nutritionist who will be able to guide you what is the right thing to take, get the basic nutrition plan from them, and based on that plan, like, I am a plant-based doctor. I talk to people about taking a plant-based diet. But there are so many vegan diets on the internet which will have oil or refined foods in them, and that is not a whole foods plant-based diet. That can be very harmful. So only once we have guided them, what is right, what is meant by whole foods plant-based diet, and how do you choose recipes which will give you the foods in their natural forms, which have been not processed, which are not ultra processed, which have not been processed, or they're minimally processed. That basic information has to come from a well-qualified nutritionist or a doctor. Only then can you go and visit your reels. Thank you.
Right, absolutely. And when you do look up on the internet, for instance, all of you doctors are always there to support us when we do our articles on onlymyhealth.com. It's a good way to see that if the information there has been substantiated to a doctor, or citation from a research, and only then should you, take that at face value. Dr. Sharbari, these lifestyle diseases, and there are so many claims, but is it possible, like for instance diabetes, is it possible to reverse diabetes, or is it only possible to manage it? Does food, sleep, lifestyle have a role to play? Because there are so many claims that come to this and we are going to reverse your diabetes. Does that actually happen?
I'm going to thank you for putting up this question. Thank you very much, because this is the right platform where I can speak about it. Just off lately, there has been a lot of, I would say, a marketing gig that is happening where they claim to reverse diabetes or reverse lifestyle disorders, which has actually been just a marketing gimmick. Let me tell you that, because it's not true in the sense that lifestyle diseases, particularly, let's talk about diabetes here. So when diabetes begins, it's the inability, in fact, of the body to produce enough amount of insulin against the sugars that come inside, right? And that happens with destruction of cells that are produced by the pancreas, and that's how the process goes, and that's how one develops diabetes. So to understand what diabetes is, it's basically the beginning of losing the cells that make insulin, right? And I'm going to talk about very vague terms here. I'm not getting into the details of science, but for the layman, Ben said so, when we're diagnosed with diabetes the first time, I'm telling you, you're going to be surprised to know this, 50% ability of the body to produce insulin naturally is already gone. That's the first time when you're already detected with type 2 diabetes, if I'm talking about. And thereafter, we can only try to preserve the other 50% that's left with us by either incorporating lifestyle changes or adding medicines, etc., etc. Once we follow the track of a good lifestyle, maybe a few medicines here and there, losing weight, etc., we can get it to a stage where we call remission. That means it's in a level where it is back to the non-diabetic level, but we still require medicines or lifestyle changes to continue to make sure that it remains in that level. So there is remission for sure, but there's nothing like reversal or going back to a normal life that you had before you had diabetes, right? Coming back to your point again, that how lifestyle has been important, till date, till over centuries now, we've established a lot of treatments for diabetes. There have been newer drugs that are coming in, but lifestyle changes remains the first and foremost line of treatment to treat diabetes and high blood sugar. So hence, when we start the treatment for diabetes, even if it is with medication, diet and exercise have the primary role to play in control of diabetes. If we lose that track and we only believe that our diabetes will be taken care by the medicines or the insulin that we are on, we're wrong. We're absolutely wrong, because no amount of medicines or insulin is going to take care of you if you eat loads of sugar or processed food or whatever that comes in your plate. Hence, lifestyle will always be the first and foremost way of treating any lifestyle disease, like let it be blood pressure, hypertension, or heart diseases, or diabetes, or obesity, etc. And then the next line of treatment is going to be through drugs. That, of course, the expert would decide for that individual. But lifestyle will never go away as the line of treatment, and it's going to stay with us forever. In fact, now with time, we've tried to understand how exercise and certain cutting down calories or certain way of putting nutrition in your plate has played a huge amount of role in controlling your blood sugars, controlling your heart diseases, your blood pressure, etc. And that is why it is important that when people read about facts like we can go back to having a normal life again, we
Yeah.
can start eating sweets, and I'm not going to be a diabetic anymore.
Yeah.
It's a big bubble,
Yeah.
and that needs to be burst as soon as possible, I think, because there are ways that you can control your blood sugar with, but it is not going to go back to the normal state. You
Yes.
can always control it. The control is in your own hands. If you want to do it, you can do it. Nobody else is going to be able to reverse it for you.
Yeah, yeah.
That
So
is
no
what
shortcuts.
sense.
Don't get into the trap. Dr. Gupta, the internet recently freaked out on reheating rice. I don't know if you heard about that how it can lead to food poisoning, and that, even cases of death because the rice was left out on the slab and it was reheated. Can you talk to us about some of these do's and don'ts, and, really tackle them as myths or facts? Reheating rice, is it okay to reheat rice? And I have a few more, but quick ones. Reheating rice?
I think every time you reheat food, you are actually decreasing its nutritional value again and again. And reheating, again, the method of reheating, again, it is very, very important that at what temperature are you reheating. And if you are reheating at a very high temperature, again, it can destroy the nutritive value. And it may not be carrying that much value for the nutrition as well. And food poisoning, as you asked, if you are leaving that rice for a long time, not refrigerated, then probably sometime it can get some kind of toxins as well because of the growth of the bacteria and all.
So refrigeration, like we said, is important. Reusing oil that we have for puris. पूरी तलने के बाद oil
Yes.
बच जाता है. As housewives and homemakers, we don't want to throw it. But
This is very, very interesting question. Have you ever noticed the color of the oil in which your samosas are fried at a street vendor? You will find it is jet black in color.
jet black? Yes.
So every time you reheat your oil, it is becoming more and more carcinogenic. I think Dr. Vaid can put more light onto that, because every time you are using reheating the oil, it is becoming more and more dangerous for you.
Cancer broth.
Cancer.
Oh my God. Use of plastic bottles for water.
So I think
wants
these
to-
questions are.
You want to take that, sir?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, please go.
So plastic bottles again. Why I really admire that the hotel staff here has kept the glass bottles, because there is a concept of the nanoplastic, nanoparticles. So I just heard one of the presentation in a conference, and it was really surprising to hear that these plastic bottles, they are actually, we are not drinking water, we are drinking carcinogens into it. So the amount of microplastic which is going inside us is really can throw our metabolism out of order.
So would you want to take any of this? And also I have
So-
another one, use of microwaves. Is that something that doctors
So-
recommend or not?
Coming back to the microplastics, probably we are consuming plastic equivalent to the size of a credit card actually every
Really?
year. Yes. So and it has gone deep down into the seabed and everywhere. So this is the next big sort of challenge which all of us will be faced. Because we don't know. The number of diseases it is going to unfold. So this is a new learning for medical science as well. Now coming back to the microwaves and all that, I think there is a lot of concern. There is a lot of a layperson's anxiety about this, but a lot of unproven facts. And the good old sort of principle of reheating, which Dr. Amit has already alluded to, I think that applies more to reheating foods. The manner in which you do, I think, and there is no direct relationship of microwaves to cancer causation, as we thought at one point in time that all these the signaling towers for all our mobile phones are, and even our mobile phones are going to be. There was a huge debate about the GSM versus the CDMA.
Yes.
All that has been settled. Okay. And in fact, there was a point early on, this is about 20 years back, people thought that tumors of the eye, tumors of the bones around the ear, and even smaller structures within the eye, the incidence has suddenly gone up. But over a period of time, all that has been settled.
Yeah.
That
There's
all
another
these-
one that a lot of women get to hear is that if you're wearing underwire bras or black bras, you will get
So
breast cancer.
it's a myth. So many myths about cancer are
Yes.
floating around. All that one needs is in your life, and then that's applicable to all the specialists who are sitting here. You can't live on the edge. जीवन की गाड़ी बीच में चलेगी, neither left nor right. You got to be sensible about what you eat, the way you live, the time you sleep, what foods you are taking. You know, and then there has to be a balance in your own lifestyle. You know.
That's true. That is true. Dr. Niranjan, in your experience, what are some of the mindset obstacles that come in the way of good heart health? That मेरे फैमिली में तो है नहीं तो मुझे हो नहीं सकता, या that I am too young, I cannot get. Are these in your patients, in your day-to-day interactions with them, do you think there are some mindset obstacles that come in the way?
See, up to a certain age, our body is quite forgiving. Okay, say we are in the 20s up to 30s, I would say. So whatever we eat, whatever we do, we still look quite reasonable. We don't have any major diseases, but the damage starts very early. So thing is that if somebody says this cannot happen to me, this is very common in humans, right? Denial.
Yeah.
Like, it's not me, it's the other person. It's the other way around. It can first happen to you and then somebody else. Like, we always think, okay, my friend died, okay, it can happen to him, maybe this was a problem, it can't happen to me. But actually there are a lot of damages that are already going on in our body. As I said earlier, we need to prioritize ourselves first. We got to look at what we eat, what we do. This being a nutritional summit, and all the experts here have added very well that most of the diseases like diabetes, hypertension, unless it's you inherit it from genes, are actually preventable. So the fact that you're just going on eating and you expect nothing, no damage to happen to you, that is the biggest misconception we are living with.
Dr. Sanchita, a different look, a different perspective, but also there are increasing cases of eating disorders. The pressure of looking great for the gram, the choices that we are making in lifestyle, the time constraints that a lot of young people are facing day to day. Is that something that you think can be prevented, can be mitigated with timely intervention?
Yes, of course. I get a lot of patients who are young, who are traveling a lot, and they really don't have time to cook too much, or their maids are cooking for them. That's also a common thing. How is my maid going to cook differently? But these are, these can be overcome. For example, like, it all depends on the person. How concerned are you about your own health? Are you willing to sit down with a doctor and understand what are the root causes of your problems? And that is always my thing. Like, I will always explain to them what are the root causes of your problems. Once they understand that, they're willing to make the changes, right? And they're willing to choose wisely. The emotional eating, the binging disorders, they really go away when we give them the right kind of foods for a certain number of days or for a certain number of weeks, and their cravings start going away. So there are ways by which these cravings can go away. We just have to introduce the right foods to them, because the gut is involved in a lot of ways in our lifestyle diseases, and once the gut is taken care of, the binging, the cravings, they can all go away. Even if you're traveling, you can make wise choices, and we are all traveling nowadays. Who is without traveling? So we have to understand just what to eat, what not to eat when we are out, and make wise decisions. That happens once the cravings and the binging go away, and they go away when you eat the right way for a certain number of weeks.
Yeah. So when you talk to your patients, do they actually inherently know what they're doing wrong, or do they discover in conversations with you?
No, they discover it in the conversations with
so
us.
there are certain
Yes.
things that we are doing unknowingly.
Yeah.
For
yeah.
instance?
For instance, they'll say, why my parents have been using ghee, my grandfathers have been using ghee, and they put a lot of ghee in all their rotis and everything. And I say, and they have lived to be maybe 80s or something. I said, if they didn't use the ghee, they would live to be 90s perhaps. So we don't know. And their lifestyle was very different. They were working a lot. They were getting rid of all that extra energy they were putting into their bodies. Today we are leading sedentary lifestyles. Our lifestyles have changed. There's a lot of environmental toxins. There's a lot of chemicals in our food. We need to decrease the saturated fats because that causes a lot of inflammation in the body. So once I explain all that, they make the changes. Within a week, they start seeing a difference.
So when you're saying no ghee, what is the oil there? What is the cooking medium that you recommend for all of? I mean,
I
because
recommend no oil for cooking.
No oil?
No oil for cooking, and it's doable. My cook can cook marvelously without oil. So many people tell me, have the maids, how will they learn? So we have cooking videos which we send them, and they learn to cook their onions and roast their onions without oil. They learn to give dal tarkas without oil, and the food can be absolutely delicious. You just have to know the recipes. If you try them, many of them are following. And some of them use minimal oil. Minimal oil, but no vegetable oils, no refined oils. More of the other things like sesame oil is still okay. So I recommend that. Or they add oily stuff like, they'll add a few peanuts to their cooking. The difference is peanuts comes with fibers, while your oil does not come with fiber. That makes all the difference. Or sesame seed paste, or maybe a little bit of coconut gratings. So that enhances the flavor of the food, but it is not harming you also. So there are ways to overcome now.
This is very interesting, cooking with no oil. We're definitely going to look up those videos. Dr. Sharvari, another big issue and concern is the rising cases of PCOS in women. Every second woman that you meet in your vicinity, in your family, is going through this challenge. There are menstrual irregularities. Menstruation is, menarche is getting, young girls are reaching menarche very quickly. Do you suggest any dietary changes or strategies to tackle this? Is this again something that should be tackled lifestyle-wise?
Okay, so there are a few things that are very commonly put up on the internet, and when you Google the symptoms, the first few things that Google puts out is PCOS, a thyroid disorder, or maybe obesity. Well, to the actual case, when a patient walks into my clinic and tells me that the patient has PCOS, so-called, that's the patient self-diagnosis is what they come out with. They don't really have PCOS,
yes.
Because it's a syndrome. It needs to have certain symptoms, it needs to have certain signs and investigations, and that's when we conclude that this is polycystic ovarian syndrome, right? But because, thanks to internet and a lot of misinformation, when you just write in your symptoms like weight gain and irregular menses, people just invariably think this is because of PCOS. So first and foremost, they really need to diagnose if it is PCOS or not, and then start making changes or start taking the treatment accordingly. But yes, that being one of the lifestyle disorders also, not because, like I said, if it is a frank case of PCOS, they would have multiple symptoms and not just weight gain or irregular menses. They would have other symptoms like excessive hair growth, they would have hair fall, they would have acne, irregular menses, hence lack of certain hormones, certain sexual steroids going abnormal here and there. When we investigate and conclude that this is PCOS, there's a different line of treatment for that. But if it's only weight gain or irregular menses, then they need to come to the specialist, discuss their problems, and understand that a lot of times only weight is a problem why your hormone or hormonal changes can take place, and it's primarily the weight that needs to be reduced to reduce the insulin resistance that causes other problems like prediabetes or now even fatty liver, or and then later on high blood pressure, etc.
Got it.
So you need to understand what exactly the problem is, and just not label it PCOS unless it's not labeled by an expert after certain set of investigations. Coming to that, insulin resistance being the biggest problem in PCOS, why they find it difficult to lose weight. Yes, for that, lifestyle is first and foremost choice, and because it happens in a lot of young patients, like you just mentioned, early teenage, early puberty, again, thanks to the lifestyle and the food that we put in our children's plate, it's mostly processed because it's easy. Packaged food is easily available outside schools, outside the classes they go to. There's very little sports activity or activity outside the house that they do. There's a lot of screen time. there are a lot of factors that perpetually led them towards obesity. And we need to cut down those factors before we conclude that they're getting into a disease or a syndrome or a chronic condition like PCOS.
Right.
So to understand that, I think yes, lifestyle really plays a big role. Nutrition really plays a big role, and that should start from the time we start teaching them what needs to be eaten, what is right food for them, what is the right amount of exercise or sports activity or activity outside the house for them.
Right.
And I think that is what needs to be changed with time. Rather than just blaming it to your hormones or just giving it away, saying that no, it's not me, it's the hormones that's doing that.
It's a disease.
Yeah,
it's
the
a
hormones
symptom.
are the bad boys, but it's not really the case always.
Got it. Dr. Gupta, if we look at the India perspective, and we spoke at the start of the event about the duality that we have in the country, that we are exporting our milk and grains, and yet, there are citizens that are malnutrition, with the stunted growth in children. How do you address and attribute this sort of, two sides, two extremes of the nutrition story?
See, most of the time we are talking about nutritional issues. It can be either undernutrition or it can be overnutrition. So earlier it was believed that diseases like heart disease, diabetes, cardiovascular disorders, dyslipidemia, fatty liver, they are because of the overnutrition. But now, if you see the latest research and findings, the urban-rural divide, the rich-poor divide, it is actually getting bridged because the access to the food has improved. So everybody is eating almost same kind of calories. And it is not just about taking more nutrition. Now there are very less chances that you will end up with undernutrition unless and until there are compelling social reasons, there are compelling financial reasons, because the level of the physical activity has gone down. So though we have a big challenge in front of us, because at the same time we are talking about the non-communicable diseases, at the same time we know that undernutrition can also lead to these non-communicable diseases. Now we know that if a child is born with less weight, low birth weight, then he is more likely to have diabetes. So this is how, a mother who is giving, who is undernourished is likely to give rise to more non-communicable diseases. So it may also be linked to some other diseases like cancers also. So it is very, very important to understand. And to this, I would just like to add one, just to touch up the point of obesity also, because Samira also talked about the weight loss and the body shaming. So let me get the message very clear. Whenever you are coming to a doctor, a nutritionist, or a lifestyle coach, and you are coming for the health, then the weight loss is always going to be positive for your health. So there should not be any doubt about it. But if you are coming to us for the cosmetic reasons, so it may not be the right choice, because the weight loss which is required to attain a positive health outcome is only to the tune of 5 to 7%. So if you are weighing 100 kg and if you can lose 5 to 7 kg of your weight, you can significantly improve your metabolic profile, you can improve your chances of cardiovascular disease, you can improve the risk of having risk of diabetes, hypertension, dyslipidemia, fatty liver, and even cancers also. So this is very, very important, which we need to understand.
Valid point, sir. And my final question, Dr. Ved, that we keep saying that diagnosis of cancer is not the end, and that there is treatment and there is a light at the end of the tunnel. But during treatment, whether it's radiation, chemo, what is the role that nutrition or food for the patient, as well as I feel for the caregiver, because there is a lot of conversation around alkaline water or a particular type of food. Juicing is also something that people talk about. Do you recommend as a doctor any particular diet to follow, both for the patient and the caregiver?
So cancer itself is a stress on the body system, and cancer is consuming the calories, consuming the body system. And most of the treatments are also a stress, be it chemotherapy, that's a chemical stress, or a radiation. And there is generally a tendency to lose one's appetite during that time. And therefore, there is a shortfall what the body needs and what the patient eats. And that's where there is a critical role of nutrition, And in most of the big cancer centers today, we are backed by nutritionists who understand cancer nutrition as a subject. But as a cancer physician, the overall message to the patients and families is that you need what is cooked in the kitchen. Don't change your diet diametrically. What you're used to for the last so many years. And there is no chamatkari khana. There is no magical diet. It's the kitchen diet, supplemented with a little more protein, because the body needs to build up the tissues which are breaking because of the cancer, because of the treatments. So one needs a little more, and some supplements which are medically directed. We were talking about the supplements for a healthy individual. Now we are talking about supplements to someone who's undergoing treatment. So these are very controlled and very calibrated supplements. And these are not everyday supplements. For example, a lot of our B complex supplements contain folic acid. And we use drugs which are anti-folates. So I don't want to give what is good for A and may not be good for B. So the two prescriptions may be different, depending on the drugs. So normal diet, little extra protein, some supplements, very calibrated what we give. And also the caregivers are indeed going through a stress themselves. Their whole day's routine may be disturbed, their eating patterns would be disturbed, what time they are eating, because they are looking after patients. So they also need to sort of regulate their food habits and their diets. Now, we are bombarded with, a lot of questions that kiwi helps in building the platelets. There is a fruit which I heard, my apologies, for the first time from one of my patients. This is graviola from South America. They said this is a cancer buster. And I was surprised. I said, please give me a day, I need to study. So there will be some, unique products or unique fruits and vegetables coming from different geographies which people are used to eating them in those environments. If you go back to our traditional living and traditional eating, what we used to eat when we were young in our village, it used to be according to the season. My grandmother would say, curd during so-and-so season, and lassi during so-and-so season, and an unseasonal, stay away from it. And that's what we tell. Eat seasonal fruits. Don't eat unseasonal fruits. Brought in from somewhere, your body is not used to. So it's quite a bit of common sense with some supplementation, which the nutritionist would understand, the physician would understand, but there is no magical diet.
Right. I think Dr. Niranjan, you want to add something?
That was a fantastic discussion. I just wanted to add some statistics because they were talking about obesity and physical activity. So one of the most recent studies, and this I'm talking about just in the last 6 months, 50% of Indians are not physically active enough. 50%. And the rise of obesity in India in the last 20 years has gone up from 20% to 40% now, and same in America and everywhere. Right. So this is like a epidemic, obesity, and then we wonder why are we dying early.
Absolutely. So many vital takeaways from this conversation. Thank you so much, all of you, for your time. And thank you for adding power to the Poshan Summit. We're very, very obliged at onlymyhealth.com. Thank you so much.